Early childhood teachers, let me ask you a question. Is teaching preschool or pre K harder now than it was 10 or 15 years ago? If you've ever wondered why or how we got to this point in early childhood education, you are in the right place. And that's why I invited my dear friend Amanda Morgan, author of How Powerful Play Drives Development in Early Childhood, to join us today. She's a passionate advocate for play and a highly sought after speaker, trainer, and consultant. And of course, a very popular speaker from my Sort of Success Summit. So, Amanda, welcome. We are so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much. It's always good to be with you, Vanessa.
It's always a pleasure to chat with you, too. I agree. So, Amanda, you have this new book out and we're so excited about it. I read it cover to cover, like the day after it arrived on my doorstep. And tell us why you wrote this book.
Right. So, a lot of, like you said, what I do a lot of speaking and training, and a lot of that is around the research behind play, why children need play, how it supports learning and development, how we can integrate it in meaningful, authentic ways into our education environments. And oftentimes I would do these trainings or speaking events, and someone would say, I am so on board with what you said. I love all of this. I just wish fill in the blank knew those same things, right? So I just wish that parents knew. I just wish that the my principal knew, or that my co-teacher knew, or that the administrator in the superintendent's office knows. And I just over and over kept hearing from people that they loved the message, but they wanted to share it and they weren't really sure how. And so a lot of what I was trying to do was to create a place that held all of this really important information that we all need to know about how young children learn and grow in a way that's easy to access, easy to read, easy to share, and get us all on the same page. So I really wrote it with a lot of audiences in mind, hoping that they could all read it, read the same message, get on the same page to help our young children.
I love that you did this because this, as a speaker myself, you have figured out a solution to the problem that I experience myself all the time. From your lips to my principal's ears, I hear sometimes, like, I wish the same things I hear over and over again. I wish that my co-teacher, how do I tell my co-teacher that play is how they learn? How do I? And so you've really solved this problem. And I think that it is going to help so many teachers. So we have a few questions that we're going to go over in this podcast episode today. And they kind of just encapsulate high level overview of the book, if you will. And that first question is that in your book, you mentioned that preschool programs before 2000 had twice the long-term impact of those since 2000. And this really struck home with me because I've been teaching since the early 90s, and I myself felt that break when I was in the classroom. So, what changed in the how and the why of early childhood education? Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, so this comes from a really interesting working paper, and it's all everything's cited in the book. That's one of the things that was really important to me, was to talk about it in a way that everybody could understand, but give all the citations so you can dig deeper, or you can hand it to somebody who's more skeptical, say, then they can find. We're not just saying a study says, we're saying this study right here, right? And so in that paper, what they found, just like you said, was that there was this decreasing effectiveness in early childhood programs. And I think it's a good news, bad news situation. So the good news is that we're just doing better for all children. So some of our anti-poverty initiatives that we've had, just ways that we're supporting children and families, that's helping all children to do better. So because of that, we don't see as much of a difference between children who are in early childhood programs and children who aren't, because we're doing a better job of serving everyone. So that's good news, right? So that accounts for part of that discrepancy of not seeing as much of a um, I hate to say like return on investment, but that's what we can say, right? Of those early childhood programs. That's the good news side. The bad news side, like you said, was that they found that there's this huge shift in the how and the why. And so, really simply, we're teaching differently. So, the how is more direct instruction, more circle time, but circle time can be fun and playful, but they're saying like direct instruction, circle time. So, more didactic methods, a lot of transition time that's not being used well. So when we're putting especially when we see pre-K programs that have been put in elementary schools, we're finding that just moving children around, right? So, like, moving them from their classroom to the cafeteria, moving them to all these different places, and just trying to fit them into a box that isn't quite their size is taking up a lot of time. So that's the how, is just we're not really meeting their needs for where they are developmentally, both in our teaching instructions and just the way we're structuring the program. And then what we're teaching, like you would guess, is becoming more focused on academics. And that's not to say that the academics don't matter. We want to have those foundational language and math and all of those things. They should be there, but we're pushing more and more down. And so we're pushing out things like play. So there's several studies that show that there's just less time being spent on self-chosen activities, less time being spent on play-based activities, and more time being spent on direct instruction, flashcards, worksheets, those types of things. And so the end result is we're seeing children who aren't thriving as much as they should be in those environments.
Yes, I loved this part, especially the part about children being taught in, elementary buildings where nothing is, they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, you know.
Exactly.
And so we always had those types of challenges. And because I spent most of my time teaching public pre-kindergarten in elementary school. I did spend some time teaching in the same district, but in actual centers that were designed for young children or had been retrofitted. So those were definitely much better as far as that piece went, but in the elementary school, it was an extra challenge. So I definitely that resonated with me. And I love the part where you say, if we keep pushing down, and I don't know if it was specifically in this chapter, but you mentioned it throughout the book. If we keep pushing down, we have to push something out, right?
Yeah.
I thought
Just
that
this
was, yeah.
idea that yeah, this idea that we can just keep pushing more and more into our early childhood sphere, it's not gonna keep expanding, right? And that's just what we see happening as we push down these developmentally inappropriate expectations.
Mhm.
We're pushing out space and really even the value of some of those things that really matter for them, that we're just shifting that whole perspective of expectations and what we're providing.
Absolutely. I love it. You're preaching to the choir. You know that.
Right.
So in chapter 2, you talk about how people don't value what they don't understand. And you had a few really good personal stories in there that were like, that encapsulates it so well. But how? How can teachers and families develop a deeper appreciation for play-based learning? Because I will tell you, even in the public schools, what parents expected us to be doing in the classroom was not what we were doing because we did a lot of play-based things, right? And so they would say, "Where are the worksheets? How do I know they're learning?
Mhm.
All they do is play all day." And it was always a constant uphill battle. It could be done, but it was a lot of work. So tell us, how can we do a better job of communicating that?
Yeah, so part of it is in the reason why I say that people don't value what they don't understand is really the first step of it, is to move away from kind of a defensive response to it. We talk a lot about defending play, and I totally get that, but it kind of puts us in this us versus them mentality,
Yes.
and I think that's the first right? That's the first step, is to kind of put aside this idea that anybody who doesn't get it or doesn't understand or doesn't value it, that they hate children or they hate me. It's just to have the best assumptions about people that,
Mhm.
okay, my administrator is, not appreciating these different things or putting pressure on this and that. Instead of just harboring this anger,
Uh-huh.
the first step is to say, okay, so apparently there's something that he or she is missing. So let me look at it that way. If he or she is feeling this way, what is it that they are showing me that they don't understand? And so that's our first step, is to assume the best of the people who are asking those questions or pushing back, and then to look at it more critically and say, if they feel this way or are saying these things, what is it that I feel like they don't understand? And so that gives me a starting place to say, okay, so if they're saying where are the worksheets, then they don't understand that experience is more valuable than what they're going to put on paper, or they don't understand that hands-on learning is the most valuable way, especially for this age, right? So once I know that, then I can present them with some of that information. So maybe it's sharing studies. It really depends who your audience is, right? So some parents, they want to see the studies. Some administrators want to see the studies. Others, it's more informal. but we want to focus in on that thing. So maybe I want to show them through studies or by inviting them to my classroom or by showing pictures of things I'm doing in my classroom, how that reality is happening, right? So here's how they're learning through active play. As they do this, they're learning this. So just communicating is a big part of it, and we can do that in a lot of ways. Like I said, you can share articles, research this book, right? That was part of the intention. And coming at it again is just let me share this with you. Let me communicate with you something I'm passionate about more so than let me argue with you and fight with you because clearly you're a terrible person, right? So
Right,
we
right.
start from that different perspective. We look for what understanding we might need to fill and then just communicate through those different ways. I know you've done a great job with some of the things that you share of even just labeling your areas so that it's
Mhm.
not just the block area, but here's the block area and here's what's going on here so that it gives them an idea of what to look for. And they start to have those same aha moments of like, oh, didn't realize how much he was playing with symmetry and shapes and cause and effect and all of these things. Once they are aware of it, they start to see it. And I honestly believe that once they start to fill in those gaps of understanding, they really become some of the best advocates. Some of your staunchest critics will become your best advocates right along with you.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I love that you mentioned the us versus them, like the savior mentality, like, I am here to defend these helpless little children, and that can be a slippery slope, you know? I
Mhm,
mean, because that creates the us versus them, you know, in the public schools, there's an us versus them every other minute of the day. The kindergarten teachers think I'm too noisy. It's me versus them, you know? It's the principal
mhm.
thinks I play too much. It's me versus the principal. The parents think we play too much. Me versus the parents. And I have to defend these poor helpless children, but what you don't need to defend, you need to just do exactly what you said and to educate, right? And to but in a way that's not seen as being, you know, throwing it down the
Talking
throat.
down.
Yeah, talking down.
Right.
One of the best ways that we did it, now I as a teacher, I wasn't so thrilled with this, but it was highly effective. And that was a parent night where they would come in
Mhm.
and do activities in the centers with their children. And then they would just be like, I had no idea that either A, my child knew all that or that he was learning all this through play or whatever. And that just really opened their eyes to appreciate things more, I think. So
Right.
yeah, that's fantastic. I really think we need to stop doing the us versus them.
Right, because honestly, the children need all of us supporting them,
Yes,
right? And just like you
right.
said, get away from the savior mentality that you're the one that's going to save all of the world's children, because really, we just need everybody supporting all of our children. And so to do that, we need to pull people in, not push people away. And so just start with that mentality that I'm inviting you in to do this really important work.
And I love what you said about always assume good intention. That's one thing that I had to do with parents. I just always assume good intention because it's so easy to go to the us versus them or me versus them, just like that. So I just always assume good intention. And I even tell them that, you know, like there are times when maybe they're late all the time or, you know, whatever. I assume that they want to be on time for school with their child, but they're having difficulty. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
just always assume the best intention and how can I help them achieve that goal? Um,
Goes a long way.
yeah. So one of the other things you talked about is another one of my passions. Well, early childhood is both of our passions, really, but this,
Right. We share a lot of passions.
yeah, right, yeah. But it's the importance you talk about the importance of self-efficacy and agency as essential ingredients for play, if play were a recipe. Why is it so important that children have choice and control in their learning experiences?
There are a lot of pieces to that, and I'm sure there's even pieces that we don't understand yet of the why, but a few of them that I know. So one is just in the drive for development, is in this early childhood period especially, and you see it all throughout child development, is this drive to be independent, to have control, right? That's how they learn the things they learn, not just academically, but that's how they learn to feed themselves and dress themselves and use the bathrooms and eventually grow up and get a job, right? All of these things are driven by this drive for autonomy and to be able to have self control and self efficacy, to feel that the things that I do matter. And so that's part of what drives child development and human development, right? We also know that it's just part of what makes humans human. So I mentioned in the book just the difference between how children learn and how machines learn. We talk a lot about AI right now, and just the irony that in a time when we're trying to get robots, I would say, or computers to think and act more like the way children learn, that we would still be putting children in situations where we expect them to act like computers, right? And part of that difference between learning like a machine or a computer or learning like a human, a huge part of that is agency. So if you look right now, agentic AI is one of these big buzz terms right now that we're just trying to figure out how to get these AI programs to actually make choices and think independently and show agency, which is a whole other topic, kind of where we're going with that. But the reality is that that's one of those key differences, that these programs can't use agency yet very well, but children are wired. It's an integral part of the way that they learn. And that's why they're so focused on it with AI programs, because it's this missing piece that humans, young children learn better than any program right now. And so being able to make those choices. And I think a part of that is that the human brain is going to drive discovery in a way that we could never program, whether we're programming a computer or programming a curriculum, right? That the human brain is programmed, we could say, to drive discovery and learning and development. And so when we let that brain make choices, it's going to ask new questions that are going to drive new learning, that are going to drive new play, that's going to build that development and growth, right? So when we let children make choices in a play-based environment, they are just going through that scientific process in rapid fire. They're asking questions and they're playing with something, whether they say it out loud or not, right? They're thinking a question is driving them to take that action, to see what happens when they scoop the rice or when they do something else. And so it's just really an essential part of their learning, that there are several studies that show that as they look at different play scenarios or teaching scenarios, that seems to be that element that really drives a big difference in learning, is letting the children have some agency, have some choice. Now, that doesn't mean that we just let them do whatever they want, right? It doesn't mean that we just open the room to chaos, because agency is so important. But
Right.
because agency is key in play, we give it this developmentally appropriate environment for children to use choice in a way that drives their learning and is in a structured environment that is meant for that. And so that's where we find that balance, to give them the right amount of agency that's then going to drive true deep learning.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've always been a big believer in giving children as many choices throughout the entire day in preschool and pre-K that you can possibly give them, because every choice is another way for them to get that agency and that self-efficacy. Like, I am in charge of my thoughts, my movements, my everything, and that just it helps them in so many ways, and it helps with behavior problems too sometimes, right?
It does, and even mental health, right? So, one of the things that I point out to people when I speak on this topic is that we've seen this increase in anxiety for young children, and I'm not a psychiatrist, and so I'm sure there are a lot of other elements to look at, but one of the things we do know is that just a natural amount of anxiety, right? Like, we all experience anxiety as just a natural emotion. When we feel that is usually because there's something we don't have control over, right? So, I get just like natural healthy levels of anxiety about like flights, right? And it's because I can't control when they're going to be delayed, or when, all these different, the traffic as I get there. It's about things I can't control. And
Right.
so I just believe that as we see this decrease in play and this increase in anxiety and other issues, so much of that comes back to children feeling like they have a healthy sense of control. And play is where they get a healthy sense of control.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Now, aside from the academics, right, you make a strong case that play supports mental health, social skills, and soft skill development. Can you explain how play fertilizes the brain and what happens when play is replaced by purely academic instruction?
Yeah, so that phrase, "fertilizer for the brain," comes from Dr. Stuart Brown, who's a great play advocate and scientist. And when he says play is really fertilizer for the brain, he's referring to all these amazing things that we found, that when a child, or I would say even an adult, I think there's going to be some differences, but we're all going to benefit, right? But when children are playing, the brain is more open to learning. There are literal changes in the chemistry, the neurotransmitters, that allow the brain to be in a better state for learning. But one that is most fascinating to me is that it actually secretes some chemicals in the prefrontal cortex that promote brain growth. So when he says fertilizer for the brain, I think of it like literally like fertilizer, that We have a chemical concoction that we put on plants to help them grow, and play produces a chemical concoction for the brain to grow and develop. Just really amazing things that we see happening in play, in interactions with adults in play that support brain development and growth just from like a scientific perspective if we just focus on the brain alone, that it's literally in a state where it can grow and learn in a more ideal way. So that's the first way, but it's also just that the environment that we create with play is like fertilizer for the brain. It's like giving an this opportunity for children to learn in all of those ways. So not just brain growth and development like we think of as getting smarter and a bigger brain and having better test scores, right? That's great. We're going to have that. But like you mentioned, it's also all of those opportunities for soft skills, for developing social skills, cooperation, being able to communicate and collaborate with other people, showing leadership and problem solving and critical thinking. Those experiences in play are going to build all of those skills that help build a whole child. We're going to have physical development, mental and emotional health opportunities for us to process feelings and talk about feelings and play with the idea of feelings. All of these things happen in a rich play environment. And so, on the flip side of that, when we are so focused on, I would almost call them parlor tricks. Sometimes we're so focused on getting children to do what we want them to do. We want to see what we want to see that we push out these other opportunities that are building the whole child. And we're pushing out these opportunities that build the foundation of those parlor tricks, right? If we have the foundation, then they're actually learning. But if we're pushing that out and just trying to teach in isolation, it's like a parlor trick, right?
Right.
So when we push out play, we're taking away all of those opportunities to build a more well-rounded, holistic human being, but we're also getting those tricks at a price because it's not the real learning. We're just checking boxes. Dr. Dale Farron shares the metaphor of an iceberg that we used to measure some of those skills that we could check boxes and see. That's like the tip of the iceberg, right? And she said we used to look at those skills with the assumption that what's below the water, that bigger part of the iceberg, those soft skills and all those other aspects we talked about, that there was this assumption that in order to show these skills that we could measure the ABCs, cutting with scissors, all those things, that in the process of building those skills, they're also getting everything that's below the water because that's how our programs were structured, right? The pre-2000 programs were structured in a way to do all those things. But in this urgency to just build the tip of the iceberg and maybe even build the tip of the iceberg bigger, right? That we're pushing out everything that is below the water just because we can't see it, we can't check the boxes easily. And so we end up with this tip of the iceberg that maybe even looks bigger, but is so shallow below that it just can't sustain itself. And so we're really in our effort to help children to be more successful or more advanced, we're actually doing them a disservice and putting them further behind in the long run.
Absolutely. And again, going back to that whole 2000 thing when things started to change, I can pinpoint exactly when my school district decided that they could no longer allow kindergarten to have dramatic play or any what they deemed toys. And they put all the dramatic play furniture and what they considered toys in the hallways. Like administrators came in and did this to teachers' classrooms. Like they were like, this is going, this is going. And it looked like garbage pickup day in New York City. I mean, it was
It's
crazy. And I'm
heartbreaking.
like, this is crazy. Like, how can you take out the dramatic play kitchen? They need to play. It was just so mind boggling to me. But I can pinpoint it. And I think this is not in the book, but it made me think about what was happening in our society during that time, right? All
Mhm.
of a sudden, we had standards to meet in preschool and pre-K, and all of a sudden, we didn't know how to meet those standards,
Mhm.
And so things started to be kind of chaotic, and it's just spiraled from there to now where pre-K looks like 1st grade, and that's so sad, right?
And it's that understanding piece because I know you do a lot with this where you're still meeting standards
Mhm.
in a meaningful and developmentally appropriate
Right,
way. So again, it's this or that. We can still meet standards in appropriate ways if the standards are appropriate, right?
right.
But there's this misunderstanding that, well, we know what meeting standards looks like in other grades. And so in those
Mhm.
grades, they sit at their desks and they do worksheets to meet those standards or whatever it may be. And so it's that understanding again that, okay, just because we want to meet standards doesn't mean we can't meet those standards in the dramatic play area, right? Like how much language and pre-reading and pre-writing
Uh,
and social awareness, all these things that are happening in dramatic play. The idea that we need to get that out of the way is like saying I need to throw away my running shoes because I need to make more room for running, right? It just doesn't make
right,
sense.
exactly, that's so true. I do a lot of dramatic play stuff online, and, I used to include a little note in my dramatic play kits that said something like, "If you receive any resistance from this, play is directly related to, reading skills and all these other skills, and you could show this to your administrator." I don't know if anyone ever did, but
I hope they did.
let's hope. So, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us where we can find your book, how to get our hands on it, and how to reach you if some of our listeners out there want to get in touch with you and further discussion with you in person?
Yeah, so you can find It's Not Just Cute, How Powerful Play Drives Development in Early Childhood, and you can find it on Amazon is probably the easiest way. But I do offer a few other ways like bulk orders for teams. So probably the easiest way to verbally share that is just to email me. So you can email me at amanda@notjustcute.com or go to my website, notjustcute.com, and we'll get you set up with whatever it is that you need.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've followed Not Just Cute for a really long time. So
Back in the day.
yeah, back in the day, and it's really evolved. So thank you so much. And to all our listeners, this episode was just a little taste of Amanda's book. And if you'd like the full blown book study experience, I'm hosting one this summer inside my mentorship program, Teaching Trailblazers. There is a link to join in the description, along with a link to Amanda's book with more info about Teaching Trailblazers. I would be so honored if you joined us. And until next time, I'm Vanessa Levin. This is Amanda Morgan. Onward and upward.